Hi, you're listening to Sergeant Dorsey Speaks podcast produced by the Get Global Network. Welcome to Sergeant Dorsey Speaks podcast. I want to share a new subscribers campaign that I've launched for Sergeant Dorsey Speaks TV. I'll continue to educate and inform you on trending and breaking news as well as offer suggestions to help you navigate through that system based on my lived experiences as a Black woman, as well as my 20 years of professional experience as an LAPD patrol officer and patrol sergeant. So be sure to remain up to date and informed. Follow Sergeant Dorsey Speaks or Sergeant Cheryl Dorsey on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. All of my platforms contain new weekly content different from what you will be hearing here on my podcast. Share with everyone you know who needs to know how to best survive police encounters. To do that, text the word survive to 56832 and subscribe to my YouTube channel, Sergeant Dorsey Speaks, and tell a friend. Text survive 56832. Again, text survive to 56832. Now, let's get to it. If you haven't already heard, I'm going to update you on last Friday. Former Minneapolis, Minnesota police officer Mohammed Noor was sentenced to 12 and a half years in prison. Now, listen, his attorneys were asking for leniency, and they wanted the judge to give him something that would maybe give him an opportunity to rethink for some period of time the loss of life in Justine Damon, not sure how she pronounces her name, but nonetheless, his attorney suggested that Officer Noor turn himself into a county detention facility for a week every year on the anniversary of Justine's death and another week on her birthday. Well, the judge was having none of that, understanding that the jury had convicted Mohammed Noor of third-degree murder and second-degree manslaughter from that July 2017 death. Judge sentenced Officer Noor to 12 and a half years in state prison. And listen, be clear, Officer Noor was, in my opinion, based on what I've read, a substandard officer. He probably was one of those people who I often say may have wanted to be the police, but should not have been the police. And I fault the police chief because, the buck stops there, right? You have an officer who's been reported and it's documented that he's substandard, he's ill-suited to be a police officer. He's being rated poorly on his field performance. Why is he still in the field? Why is he still on the job, Chief? And so they make an example out of Officer Noor. They punish him and sentenced him to 12 and a half years in prison because someone lost their life. I would argue that Justine might still be alive if the police chief over there in Minneapolis had done his job. Right? Anyway, former Officer Noor, off to prison for 12 and a half years for the fatal police shooting of a citizen. And listen, this is one of those rare times when I was in fear for my life, didn't quite work. Officer Noor testified on his own defense during the trial, and that was his defense. Hey, I was afraid. I was sitting in the car with my partner. We were responding to some kind of an unknown trouble call in late night, early morning hours, and he says he heard a thud on the hood of the car, a thump, something that scared the bejesus out of him. And I mean, it was stupid what he did, right? He reached across his partner from the passenger side of the vehicle and fired out of the driver's side window, killing this woman. So he certainly should have gotten something in addition to losing his job. I just don't know if 12 and a half years was reasonable. But Officer Noor is a Somali American. Wonder if that had anything to do with it. Things that make you go, Anyway, in other, do we need to remind you that you're Black news? Over in Fort Worth, Texas, there is a former police chief by the name of Joel Fitzgerald. Now, Joel Fitzgerald is a Black man. Thus, I begin my story with, do we need to remind you? that you're black, Joel. Evidently, he forgot. And so he got his notification on last week because they fired him. They fired him. And actually, he didn't get the notification last week. He was fired back on May 20th, but it's in the news last week that he is now suing the city. Now, Joel Fitzgerald says that he's suing the city because he was fired in retaliation for being a whistleblower. He's saying that he has been fired because of a confrontation that was set up to get him. And he fell for the setup. Was also one of the reasons that he was fired. Now, if you don't know about the confrontation, because I spoke about it before, but I'll just give you the Reader's Digest again real quick. So a couple of months ago, I'm calling this police prom week. In DC, they actually had the National Police Officers Memorial Week festivities. And Joel Fitzgerald attended, representing Fort Worth, right? And it was during prom week. I like that term. So it was during prom week that Joel Fitzgerald gets into this pissing match, if you will. He gets into an argument with a member of the union, the police union there in Fort Worth, who's also attending prom week, right? So the way the story goes is that Joel Fitzgerald gets into this argument of some sort, and they say they got real loud and real ugly. And listen, he's a police chief, so they hold you to a higher standard, sir. You can't be showing up at prom week and acting like the coppers, like the ground pounders. There's rules and regulations. But anyway, he gets into this argument with this guy from Fort Worth Police Union because just prior to attending prom week, Joel Fitzgerald had been kicked out. He had been kicked out of CLEATS, right? CLEATS, which is the Combined Law Enforcement Associations of Texas, CLEAT, C-L-E-A-T. He was kicked out of CLEAT because they found out that he wasn't a member of the Fort Worth's local police union. I mean, if those are the rules, those are the rules. It sounds reasonable to me. You got to be a member of the local police union in order to be a member of CLEAT. So he got kicked out. And I guess he was butthurt. He was butthurt about it. So he got into this big Donnybrook, verbal albeit, at prom week. And the police authorities, officials, the city manager, somebody back in Fort Worth was like, yeah, okay, so we've had enough of you, sir. And they showed him the door. Joel Fitzgerald said that whole confrontation at prom week was something that was orchestrated so that they could publicly dress him down. But listen, even if he thought that it was orchestrated, his words, according to articles that I've read, and I'll use the air quote for orchestrated, right? So that he could be publicly dressed down, air quote. That's what he said. He's a chief of police. Nobody can make you. Nobody can trick you. Nobody can orchestrate a situation to get you to do something that could be deemed unprofessional. Sir, you are the professional. You didn't see that setup coming, Dr. Joel Fitzgerald? Anyway, that's one of the reasons that he's alleging he's being retaliated against. And then, of course, he also says in his lawsuit that, he was trying to clean up the Fort Worth Police Department. And evidently they, whoever they are, didn't like his efforts to clean up the department. He's reported to have disciplined more than 50 officers as the police chief for violations that include drug use, drunken driving, and other offenses. This according to his lawsuit. And that is the reason that he is alleging now that he was fired. That and the fact that he also reported 2 hours after his firing, he was supposed to meet with some FBI agents regarding some shenanigans that were going on there with the department and things that they should have been doing that they weren't doing. But anyway, nonetheless, he says he's being retaliated against. Now, let's just check the record and let's be clear about Police Chief Joel Fitzgerald, Dr. Joel Fitzgerald. the same Chief Joel Fitzgerald who had applied for the commissioner job over in Baltimore earlier this year. Talked about that as well, because I knew there was some shenanigans going on when he was having a hard time getting his name through the system. And listen, the mayor over there in Baltimore, Mayor Catherine Pugh, she's gone now too, but she was the one that was really spearheading his selection over there for the Baltimore Police Department. Now, I don't know if there's some history or relationship, or if Catherine Pugh was just trying to, hook a brother up. But listen, she was really moving swiftly with his appointment to that position. And the council members were over there like, hold up, sister girl, slow your roll. What's up? I think of, and I'm going to just say it like this because, a lot of things remind me of police stuff. And even if you're not a police officer, you can understand when you're trying to cut corners, when you're in a hurry, you're behind the wheel of the car, you're trying to get somewhere, right? And you're in traffic and there's a long line, a procession of cars in front of you, and you're waiting to make that right turn, and you see a gas station parking lot that has an entrance and an exit that will get you around that traffic and onto the next street, so you cut through. Right? Well, that's what Catherine Pugh was trying to do with old boy Joel Fitzgerald's appointment over there. She was trying to cut some corners and get him appointed, and the city council was just having none of that. And so they started looking into Joel Fitzgerald. And then what they found out is that he had exaggerated on his resume. He had exaggerated, they said, and he overstated his accomplishments. So in other words, Joel Fitzgerald lied. Let's just call it what it is. He lied about his accomplishments and exaggerated on his resume about the time that he spent at Allentown when he was a police chief, as well as his time as police chief in Fort Worth. And they figured it out because they made Catherine Pugh, former mayor, slow her roll. They found out that during the time when Fitzgerald was the police chief over in Allentown, and listen, he was only the police chief there for a couple of years, 2013 to 2015. And it was during that 2-year period that he, air quote, mischaracterized, aka my word, lied about what he accomplished. Truthfully, it's reported that while he was over in Allentown as the police chief, that department, and this is a quote from an article that I found, had been dogged by complaints of police brutality during Joe Fitzgerald's tenure as a chief. And that department had faced at least 8 lawsuits alleging police misconduct, and overtime spending was up. So they weren't real happy with Chief Fitzgerald over there in Allentown, and maybe that's why he was only there for 2 years. Now, I don't know if Fort Worth didn't do their due diligence, or they just liked the cut of his jib and hired him as their police chief, but they did. And when he got over there, things didn't get much better. Thus, they showed him the door back on May 20th. And so now he's alleging that, he's a whistleblower, and he's filed this lawsuit. He's asking for $1 million. He's asking, Joel Fitzgerald is asking to be reinstated and given back pay. He says he was about to report to the FBI that the city was not in compliance with federal criminal justice information system regulations. And he was going to tell. Now, listen, that all may very well be true. The department may not have been in compliance with the Federal Criminal Justice Information System regulations, CJIS, because, police departments like acronyms. So that may very well be true, that the department wasn't in compliance. But did he just find that out on May 20th? Or had they not been in compliance for a minute? Because listen, I'm looking at the calendar, and if he left Allentown in 2015, right? And he was going to make this announcement about this non-compliance to the FBI in May of 2019. Well, what the heck? That was 4 years of non-compliance under his command. So why is he waiting until now, May 20th, 2019, to tell the feds and other officials, allegedly, the way the story goes, the Dallas Fort Worth Police Department was not in compliance? Did he tell because he knew they were coming after him? Right? I mean, he's not a dummy. This guy's a PhD. I think that's part and parcel as to why he pulled his name out of consideration over there in Baltimore when Marilyn Pugh was trying to get him through that system so quickly. I think he realized the writing was on the wall and it wasn't going to happen. And so he withdrew his own name and said that, he had a situation with his son. And I'm not making light of this at all. Be clear. His son was undergoing some sort of brain surgery. And so he withdrew his name, and anyone could understand that. Any parent could understand that, if this is going to be a long, involved process with a sick child, it's going to need your attention, require your presence. And so he withdrew his name from consideration over in Baltimore. But is that really why he withdrew his name? Or was it just, conveniently coincidental that he withdrew his name from consideration because he knew city council members over in Baltimore were coming for him? And so he said, you know what, let me just go ahead and eject now. Let me just go ahead and get off this plane right now before it gets real stupid. And he did. And so as that was going on now, did he understand that his termination was coming and there was no slowing that train? Because it's reported that in his talks with whomever he was having discussions with over there in Fort Worth, they told him, allegedly, according to his lawsuit, that, hey, if you just go away into the good night quietly, we will, and promise not to sue, we'll give you a few coins. And if you don't go away into the good night quietly, then we're going to come for you. And so, according to the reports, Joe Fitzgerald was, probably a fan of Name That Tune. I don't know if he's old enough to remember that show, but I do. And maybe I'm dating myself right now. But you remember Name That Tune. They'd play a few bars and you'd have to say whether or not you can actually name the title of the song in 2, 3, 4, or 7 notes, right? So they said, hey, we can name that tune in 4 notes. And Joel Fitzgerald said, well, then name that tune, because I'm not going to resign. I'm not going to take your money, and I'm not going to promise to not sue. So he didn't. They fired him. And now he's suing. So, Joel Fitzgerald probably forgot that he was black. When you get to become a police chief, you get to breathe that special air that they breathe. I'm not mad at him. Do what you have to do, sir. But see, this is why you've heard me say before, I never bled blue. I was clear who I was when I joined the LAPD. And certainly if I wasn't clear when I joined, I learned very quickly through my peers, through my training officers, from my supervisors. I knew I was black, and they never let me forget it. And that wasn't really an issue because I was clear. And so I never had my feelings hurt by anybody on the LAPD when they didn't treat me right. I wasn't looking to breathe that special air. I was clear about what I was going to tolerate and what I wasn't going to tolerate. And I knew that I never wanted to go along to get along. When I joined the LAPD, I was already the mother of 1 young black man and eventually went on to have 3 more. So I was clear about how I wanted to treat people and how I wanted people to look at me based on the strength of who I am in a black community. So I never got butthurt like Joel Fitzgerald when they told me that I was black, because I'm already understanding who I am. So anyway, he's breathing that special air, and I guess he forgot. Joel came from Philadelphia. He was a police officer over in Philly before he ascended to the rank of chief, before he started breathing that special air. And he forgot. And so on May 20th, 2019, Dr. Joel Fitzgerald, former Fort Worth police chief, was reminded. On to some other police news that really bothers me, and I'm going to talk about this because I've seen a lot of back and forth on social media. I'm in some groups with police officers and others who feel a certain kind of way, and I talked a little bit about this on CNN a few weeks ago when I was on, with regards to police officers and how they respond to active shooter situations. At that time, I was speaking specifically about the Virginia Beach shooting, but I've talked often about other incidents with this active shooter situation that we have found ourselves in. I didn't have to deal a lot. Well, I didn't have to deal at all with active shooter scenarios during my time on the LAPD. Certainly I've been involved in drive-by shootings or a shooting incident that might happen in my presence, or we might respond to a shooting call that's still going on, right? Gangland shootings, but not the kind of stuff that's going on right now. And so over in Florida, there is a veteran police officer who is 56 years old, had 30 years on the department, and he was a school resource officer during that Parkland school shooting. And I believe, based on the things that I'm reading about that incident, that he is being made a scapegoat. His name is Scot Peterson. And Scot Peterson is now facing criminal charges, being called a coward by many of the parents of those young people who lost their lives at the school over there in Florida. This president has referred to him as a coward. Well, that's a whole nother story, right? Because this is the guy with the bone spurs and, whatever else it was that kept him out of service to his country. The guy who did a kangaroo's leap off of a platform during his running for president because some kid jumped up on the platform with him. And so I'm not really sure that he's in a position to call somebody a coward, but nonetheless, he has. And so I'm just really bothered by this from my perspective as a 20-year in uniform police officer and sergeant. And I've talked to a lot of my colleagues who feel the same way that I do. Now, listen, not everybody that I've talked to feels this way, but I'm going to tell you for real. At 56 years old, with 30 years on the job, you understand that this man, Scot Peterson, was a school resource officer because he was in the twilight of his career. He was looking at the light that's coming at the end of that proverbial tunnel. And like most of us, you're looking for a way to work smarter and not harder. Being a ground pounder like I was, being in patrol like I was for 20 years, that's a young man's game. And I understood that. And I was fortunate enough to have joined the LAPD very, very young, did 20 years and retired still relatively young, because I knew, number one, as a woman, I didn't want to be out there chasing people, seeing the man, seeing the woman, as we say on LAPD, and then having to run eastbound through the houses behind somebody. That wasn't something I wanted to do north of 50 for sure. And so this Scot Peterson found him a nice cushy job working at a high school where the kids were probably, for the most part, good kids and very respectful. And he was a warm body. He was collecting a paycheck. He had done his time and was looking forward to retirement, not expecting anything like what happened in February of 2018 to happen, right? And so he's just one person, as best I can tell, at this school campus when this mass shooter decides to come on and start firing rounds with weaponry that certainly was superior to what Officer Scot Peterson had. And because he was there, and because Officer Peterson chose not to be a martyr and go running into something that he was not properly prepared to deal with by himself, he's been charged with 7 counts of child neglect with great bodily harm, 3 counts of culpable negligence, exposure to harm, and 1 count of perjury, for being 56 years old, 30 years into his career on a school campus, all alone, when a shooter arrives. I think it's unreasonable, and I think it's unconscionable to expect him to sacrifice his life, possibly, by confronting someone that police officers are never trained to confront someone one-on-one. We always want the numbers on our side. I was certainly taught, and I'm sure that training is different from department to department, but it's kind of the same generically. We want the numbers to be on our side. We're taught that there's never any emergency. Take your time, slow down. It's when you rush into a situation that you can get hurt or you can get others hurt. I can't imagine what it must have been like for him to be at that school campus, hear shots and not know exactly where it's coming from, not know how many individuals are involved. And then when you read the reports, and listen, this is an emotional thing, and I get it. Young people lost their lives. I get it. Parents are hurting. I understand. But when you read the reports and you hear stuff like, he was cowering in a corner, refusing to get engaged from, and I've heard varying times, from 27 minutes to 45 minutes. He was cowering, Scot Peterson was cowering in a corner. So the first question that I have as a supervisor is, 27 to 45 minutes? He's waiting for backup? Where the heck is backup? Where are they coming from? Because most police departments strive to have a response time for any kind of a call between, I'd say 7 minutes is a good response time to maybe 12 on the slow end, right? Any department would be concerned about a 27-minute response time. And then you have an officer putting out, he had to have said officer needs help. He couldn't have been asking for just backup. You got shots fired. Officer needs help. I know what happens when you put out a help call. I know what happens when you put out a backup call. I know what happens when you just say, hey, can I just get one unit over here on LAPD as a patrol officer? If I say I just need one unit to come over here and stand by, the next thing I know, I got 6 or 7 of my colleagues showing up. So I know exactly what happens when you put out an officer needs help call. In LA, you're going to get, if I'm working 77th, I might get some officers from doggone West LA division showing up, because that's what we do. That's how we respond when we know that one of our own is in trouble. And so to think that it took 27 to 45 minutes for backup to come, I got questions. Where were they? What were they doing? Why did it take so long? And then I've read that when officers did finally respond, that it's purported that Scot Peterson may have been the one to tell folks to stand down, don't go in. Again, I got questions. Because if responding units, whether they were from his agency or Coral Springs, which it's reported that a lot of officers from Coral Springs did respond, would one little officer, Scot Peterson, be able to tell everybody, don't go in, and would everybody listen? It just seems unreasonable to me that it could happen that way. And listen, we're trying this thing in the court of public opinion right now, and he's not responded, he being Scot Peterson. He's going to wait and go to court because he has a right to be heard in court, and we're not going to convince anybody. I'm not going to convince anybody, even on this podcast, about what it is I think should have happened, could have happened, or how Scot Peterson is being treated in the aftermath. I'm just telling you, this is my opinion based on what I did, based on what I know, and based on what I've read. And then the prosecutors are also charging him with making a false statement, in that it's reported he said he didn't hear gunfire. Now, listen, I wasn't there and I didn't talk to the man, so I don't know if he made that statement or not. But to me, it just almost sounds like one of those things that, police departments and prosecutors will do, right? They'll just throw everything up on the wall and see what sticks. We're right now following much fallout behind a documentary where prosecutors did some stuff that was unsavory. When they see us, right? So it's not unreasonable to think that a prosecutor would do something untoward, and it doesn't matter the ethnicity of the person. Once they get their mindset and they've decided that tag, you're it, then they come after you. And so while Scot Peterson may not have followed the rules, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute, what he did wasn't, in my opinion, a crime. It might have been stupid. It might have been immoral. But I don't think it's anything that he should be jailed for. I believe that they were looking for a scapegoat. a sacrificial lamb over there in Broward County, and they found one. And I think it's interesting to note that the prior sheriff over there in Broward County, his name is Scott Israel or Steve Israel. I've seen it written a couple of different ways in news articles, but Sheriff Israel is gone. He was fired in the aftermath of all of this stuff that happened or didn't happen over there during that mass shooting. He was fired. Nobody's charging him with any crime. And according to information that's out there, Officer Peterson took what he believed to be, air quote, a tactical position in response to what he believed was outdoor gunfire. And then he radioed to his dispatch code red, whatever, that must be something pretty serious over there. I don't know exactly what code red means, but he took a tactical position. He's alone. There's one or maybe more people with high-powered weapons on a school campus. He gets on the radio. He takes a position of cover. He's directing responding units in, and he goes code red. He's following the policy that was implemented by then Sheriff Israel. Sheriff Israel had a policy that instead of mandating officers to confront active shooters, his policy was, and I'm quoting, that you may do so. And Israel is quoted as telling the commission during some type of a hearing that he wanted to avoid sending his officers on what he described as a, quote, suicide mission. And there are several deputies who have also spoken out and said that they couldn't remember when they had been last trained in active shooter scenarios or what to do or how to handle an active shooter. These are the officers. These are the deputies on that police department. And so what would you have this one grandpa, which is what he could be, what would you have grandpa do but try to give good intel to the officers that are responding so that everybody's safe, so that those responding officers don't put themselves in harm's way as they enter? Well, now that all that's said and done, hindsight being 2020, the department has changed the language, if you will, from you may engage in active shooter to you shall go in. You shall go in. It's been changed. Israel is gone. They got rid of him. And then they brought in my good friend, Gregory Toney, right? They brought in Gregory Toney when they got rid of Sheriff Israel. And as I was looking at articles with regards to this whole Gregory Toney, because I have issue with him anyway. Okay, I've got issue with him in regards to the young teenage black kid who was body slammed and had his head smashed into the ground by one of Sheriff Toney's deputies. But I digressed. I'll talk about that a little bit more. I read also that one of the parents of one of the young ladies who was killed at the school, his name is Andrew Pollock. Andrew Pollock. He is the father of Meadow, and Meadow was killed. And Andrew Pollock seems to be very, very involved in what's going on right now with Scot Peterson. He's quoted in the paper as saying that I get things done. And he says there's nothing on this planet I can't get done, especially since my daughter was murdered. And I have the heart of a lion, okay? And I'm not going anywhere. That's Andrew Pollock being quoted in one of the local newspapers there. And so listen, he's hurting. I get it. He lost his daughter. And so now he has turned his sights on not only Scot Peterson, but he says, Mr. Pollock says his next target is the Broward School Superintendent, Robert Runcie. Now, Mr. Pollock said he doesn't know if he has the real juice to help get the superintendent gone, to cause him to lose his job, but he is working mightily in that regard. And then Mr. Pollock went on to say that he had a conversation with Sheriff Gregory Toney, who replaced Sheriff Israel. He says, hey, we all went to the same gym together, and I think he's doing a wonderful job, and that the community is getting behind him, and the kids are going to be safe, and the community as a whole will be safer. This is the father of one of the young girls, Andrew Pollock, the father of Meadow, talking about his relationship and his belief system as it relates to Sheriff Gregory Toney, who replaced Sheriff Israel. So my question is, okay, so you and Gregory, you guys work out at the same gym. Is that what's up? You work out at the same gym, and I'm sure, you knew who he was before he was appointed. It's reported that Gregory Toney has some background. That's probably what helped him get that job over there in Broward County as their sheriff when they were looking to replace Israel. And I wonder if Pollock had some conversations with Gregory Toney right after that shooting. And if Gregory Toney, because of his relationship at the gym, because they're gym buddies, they're gym rats, right? By Pollock's own admission, is that why Gregory Toney was given the job as sheriff over there? And is that why Gregory Toney is, if he is, and I don't know, so I'm just going to say alleged to be in support of them going after Scot Peterson now? Because listen, if Gregory Toney didn't want this to happen, it wouldn't be. He would be fighting for his deputy, his veteran 30-year deputy, right? But they don't seem to have any appetite for doing anything except for taking this guy's head off, Game of Thrones style. And I just think it's wrong. I think it's so wrong. So I haven't really heard anybody speaking up publicly on behalf of Scot Peterson. I think, when I look at him on the still photos that they have from him being in court, he looks like a broken man. He's 56 years old. Surely, in my belief, just knowing what I know and what I've seen during my time on the job and understanding police culture and all of that, what I do know is that these kinds of situations will ruin you. It will devastate you. You will become roadkill. I hope he's strong enough to get through this. I wonder to myself, if he is married, will his marriage survive this stress? I'm sure he has children and maybe even grandchildren who, may be snickered at, pointed at, talked about because of who he is in that town, may be bullied. So this thing is really far reaching. And is it just because they found an easy target in Scot Peterson? Because finally we have a police officer that, folks are always clamoring, can't you get one? Can't you do something with one? And so we have an easy target here. Let's pick this guy off, Scot Peterson, and let's make an example of him. And maybe we can calm the natives down because they've been looking for us to do something with the police officer. I wish Gregory Toney would show this kind of enthusiasm with regards to Officer Christopher Krikovich. And Christopher Krikovich is the officer who was slamming this black kid about 15 years old, slamming his head into the ground after he pepper sprayed him because, I don't know why. Kids were being kids. Singled this black kid out of a group of I don't know how many. It was outrageous. The video is out there. And I'm not the only one who was taken aback by this. Even the mayor, Mark Bogan, said in a statement that officer, Christopher Krikovich, he should be fired, quote, immediately. That was back in April when the mayor was saying that Gregory Toney, you got a deputy who needs to be fired immediately. And I saw a video where Gregory Toney went before their city council, and he was really kind of testy with one of the councilmen who was, asking him to, explain this, sir. What are you doing with this officer? And he mumbled off some curt words and then told the councilman, you don't get to talk to me. You don't get to question me. You don't wear this uniform. You haven't done what I've done, so you don't get to ask me nothing. And his final word is, well, he being Gregory Toney, Sheriff Gregory Toney, is, well, this is going to take some time for us to look into. Christopher Krikovich, it's going to take some time for us to look into. You see a white man, good-sized white man, straddling a 15-year-old scrawny little black kid, pepper spraying him and then ramming his head repeatedly into the ground, Sheriff Gregory Toney, and you can't figure out what to do. It's going to take you some time to figure this one out, but you know exactly what to do with Scot Peterson. Oof. I better stop. I better stop. I hope Scot Peterson will be okay. And this is an incident, like I said, where, ethnicity is not an issue. You get on the wrong side of the cops. I tell you all the time, contempt of cop, it is a real thing. Mostly we see contempt of cop being handled police officer versus the public. Contempt of cop I've described as piss them off. There is a price to pay. Citizens make an officer mad when they ask a question, when they don't come here, when they don't turn around, when they won't put out a cigarette. I get it. I get it. Officers say you're not complying, so now they're going to punish you. Contempt of cop. Make me mad. There's a price to pay. Contempt of cop exists in the police station. Piss off a supervisor. Piss off a captain. Make a chief mad. There's a price to pay. There's a price to pay. And so right now, maybe Scot Peterson made somebody mad. I don't know. But I don't think it's right. I think that Scot Peterson should certainly suffer some sort of a consequence. There needs to be accountability. People lost their lives. If he didn't do something procedurally right, then fire him. He's already gone. I mean, he resigned. I believe they allowed him to resign rather than be fired. So he's gone. But to send this 56-year-old man in the twilight of his career to prison because Gregory Toney wants a brownie point, wants to prove he's a bad ass, and that he will do something with an errant officer, Scot Peterson, not so much with Christopher Krekovich. Yeah. I don't fault Scot Peterson for not wanting that city to name an off-ramp or a street corner after him after he's been killed in the line of duty, because he went in ill-prepared, ill-suited, and obviously untrained to deal with an active shooter by former Sheriff Israel's own admission. Who would expect Scot Peterson to turn into damn Yosemite Sam and just run into that school praying and spraying? Because had he done that, right now we might be talking about him in a much different way and saying how stupid he was to have done that, knowing what he should have known. So, on to Arizona. Over in Arizona, there is a female police chief over there, a sister girl by the name of Jerry Williams. And it's been reported in the news that Jerry Williams has said she is just shocked. I say shocked. Regarding reports of racist Facebook comments by some of her officers. Now that the chief is aware of that, she has pulled these officers from their assignments. And well, their enforcement assignments anyway. I guess they're somewhere in the administrative, building doing whatever, because these remarks that they have found to be very off-putting. According to what they were able to find out, there was a database that includes 179 questionable posts. 75 of those questionable posts come from current officers, and there are an additional 22 officers who are retired. Now, listen, I'm in a group on Facebook as well with retired police officers, and so, I think they comport themselves for the most part appropriately. I mean, I certainly see and hear things that I don't agree with, but I'm not just seeing and hearing wholesale hate as it's reported. Some of the posts are said to be very egregious, racist, sexually motivated, religiously motivated, and just pure hate, according to Police Chief Jerry Williams. And so she is in the midst, I would imagine, of some kind of an internal investigation. And she says that she's looking into the veracity of misconduct. And we know it's misconduct. So what I want to know is what you going to do, Chief Williams? Because listen, these officers, these 75 officers, they have shown you who they are. They're not just in this special place talking crazy because they just, saw an opportunity to talk crazy. They're doing that because that's who they are. And if they are promoting hate and dissension, as you say, then they need to find another occupation. Chief, it's been reported that Phoenix, which is predominantly white, has a department of about 2,937 sworn officers. Of those 2,937 937 sworn officers, the majority of them are white. 73% of them are white. 19% of that 2,900 is Hispanic, and then 4% of the Phoenix Police Department is black. Compare and contrast that to the population. 42% white, 43% Hispanic, and 7% black. That's the population over in Phoenix. So I want to know, Chief, what are you doing for recruitment to get more blacks on your department? I mean, typically you want the department to reflect the community that they serve. And if the community is 7% black, then you should be striving to get your department numbers up. I hope you will. I think having more minority officers, more black officers, might be helpful, Chief Jerry Williams. Now, in other preaching to the choir news, because that's what I'm going to do. Listen, they kill me with these police departments, how they're always coming up with these blue ribbon panel, discussions and reports. And all of a sudden now, because it's written somewhere in a damn survey, in a report, all of a sudden it's important and it has a big deal. When I often say, all you have to do if you really want to know what's going on in a community is ask the people to live there. So now there's a report that shows black drivers in Louisville are searched three times more than white drivers. Who knew? Who knew? I bet you before they did this survey, if you would have just asked black folks over in Louisville, they probably could have told you that, right? But now we have, statistics because people like statistics. 130,999 traffic stops in Louisville between 2016 and 2018 that ended up with citations being issued, right? And of that number, blacks were disproportionately stopped 3 times more and likely to be searched than white drivers. Blacks make up about 20% of Louisville's driving age population. Yet they have accounted for 33% of the stops and 57% of the searches. Now, this is not only going on in Louisville, this is also very similar to what's occurring over in Nashville. Over in Nashville, study shows last year that there were 2.5 million stops. And of those 2.5 million stops, blacks were stopped at a rate 44% higher than whites. I'm clutching my pearls. So as a result of that now, there's a new law that's going into effect on August the 1st, and it's going to require that officers they have to be able to justify why they remove a driver from their vehicle, why they frisk or search you, handcuff, or make you sit on the ground. Now listen, I didn't know they were still making folks sit on the ground. I heard that the other day. I was talking to an activist over in Pasadena because they said, yeah, they still get down like that over in Pasadena, California. They still make you sit on the ground. I knew that was a big deal when I was on the police department as a young officer, and that was one of the first things that I would not allow to happen when I worked with a white officer. When we stopped somebody, I would tell my officer if they attempted to do that in my presence, and it wasn't often that they did, but if they did, I would tell them, we don't set people on the ground. If you're scared or you're concerned, you got to worry about this person, and you think putting them on the ground, on the curb, is going to make you now safe, air quote safe, then let's do what we're trained and taught. Let's handcuff them, because the cuffs go on just like they come off, and the person may not like it, but I'll explain it to you later. So we'll handcuff that person and we'll put them in the back of the police car so that they're safe, and now officer partner, you're safe, and then you can do whatever it is that you need to do, but we don't sit people on the curb. I was very clear about that. And so to hear that stuff still goes on is just kind of really hard to understand why it's tolerated, and where are the supervisors who happen to drive by their patrol officers and see them sitting somebody on the curb? Where are you supervisors? Because I think a lot of this stuff that goes on could clearly be corrected if patrol officers knew that their patrol supervisors were going to come by and observe them in the field, which is what we're supposed to do. And as a patrol supervisor, it's my responsibility, if I see an officer doing something, to speak on it. Number one, my job is to keep my officer out of trouble. So while you may not like me interfering, officer, it's okay, because I got a job to do. And so I'm going to tell you, if I see you sitting somebody on the curb, get them up. Get them up. And then we're going to have a conversation. We're going to debrief after that traffic stop, officer, and you're going to explain to me why you did that, and then I'm going to explain to you why it won't happen again. And if you're not real clear, I'll help you better understand it by putting it on paper, because that's what I do. I put pen to paper. And so I'm bothered by a lot of what goes on, because I think patrol supervisors are doing the community a disservice. And so anyway, listen, you know, police officers are not going to stop this foolishness. So what I want to know is, what are the consequences when they don't? What happens when they aren't able to justify? Because accountability is something that we are not seeing wholesale when police officers engage in policy violations or just outright misconduct. Be careful, Nashville. You got rights. Request a supervisor the next time somebody tries to frisk you, get you out your car, or set you on the curb, Nashville, Louisville. And now it's time for Did You Know? I talked about this a couple of days ago, and, you know, many of you probably have already seen there have been a couple of deaths reported. A Maryland couple over in the Dominican Republic, vacationing about a week ago now, found dead and unresponsive in their hotel room. And now we're starting to hear more people coming forward with tales of, I didn't die, but I got really, really sick. And so in addition to the death and the illnesses that are related to the Dominican Republic, there is now a travel advisory warning people about violent crime that's occurring over there on the island. Now, in addition to that couple in Maryland that were found dead in their hotel room over at the Grand Bahia Principe Resort in La Romana, there was another lady by the name of Carolyn Null and her boyfriend, Tom Schwander. Now, they got very, very sick, staying at that same hotel where the couple were found dead. And what they described is that they said their room smelled like somebody had dumped paint just all over the room. And they woke up in the middle of the night, drooling excessively, eyes would not stop watering, according to the report. And so they were so sick, they left that next morning. They got the heck out of there. Went home being Colorado, visited a doctor who diagnosed them with poisoning, and I'm going to see if I can get this right, from organophosphate. Organophosphate is a chemical found in insecticides. That's what this couple somehow had been subjected to, ingested, been in the presence of, and it made them very, very sick. Now we're also hearing of another lady who was very, very sick. She was staying in the sister resort to the Grand Bahia Principe. And this one is called the Luxury Bahia Principe Bougainville, or Bougainville, I'm not sure, Bougainville. Anyway, that's a sister resort for the Grand Bahia. So whether it's the Grand Bahia or the Luxury Bahia, you guys be careful. According to Awilda Montes, she's 43, from Brooklyn. This happened to her back in October. Because of all this being talked about right now, she has come forward. But back in October, what she reported is that she was passing by the bar or something, and she saw a bottle of what she thought was 7-Up, and she picked it up from the bar to drink it, and she got these chemical burns in her mouth, and she started vomiting once she made it back to her room. What she believes, or what it was discovered, is that there was bleach in that bottle. Now, I don't know if the inference to be drawn is somebody over there is playing games and putting, things that could harm you in bottles that would make you think it's a beverage, and you drink it. And thankfully she didn't just, guzzle it down. She had it in her mouth and then spit it right out, but there was significant damage done, and she started vomiting and spitting up blood. That was last October. So I don't know if the officials over there are really being forthright, if you will, about what's going on, because tourism is a thing and they don't want to deter people from coming to the island, clearly. I know I've seen a lot of people on social media talking about they already have plans, they've spent money, they can't change their plans to travel to the DR. So if the DR are in your vacation plans, be very, very careful, and particularly if you're staying at any of the properties that have to deal with the Bahia Principe, Principe, whether it's the Grand Bahia or the Luxury Bahia in La Romana. Be very careful. So until next time, you guys, be good, be safe, and be very, very careful if your plans take you to the DR.
You have been listening to the Sergeant Dorsey Speaks podcast, produced by the Get Global Network. Sergeant Cheryl Dorsey is a television commentator, social justice advocate, and is also well known for her book, Black and Blue, Creation of a Social Advocate, an autobiography of her 20-year career as a Black woman on the Los Angeles Police Department. The book details what she learned as an LAPD insider. Sergeant Dorsey can be contacted through her website, sgtdorseyspeaks.com, or via any of her social media sites like YouTube and Facebook. Take the time to subscribe to her YouTube channel and also subscribe to this podcast via major podcast networks like iHeartRadio, iTunes, Spotify, TuneIn, Spreaker, Stitcher, Google Podcast, and many others. The podcast is also available on wireless speaker systems like Alexa and Sonos.